Let's bring him in. We're going to film school. And we're going to close out the 1980s this morning with one of the top grossing films of 1989. And I have to say, it was just a fun flick. Haven't seen it in a while, but I liked it. And I'll let Joe take it from there. Let's go to film school with Joe Fortunato, film study professor. Good morning, Joe.
Good morning, Ray. Good morning, everybody.
Go right ahead, Joe.
Okay. Today we're going to look back at the 35th anniversary of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, released May 24th, 1989. And this is the third installment of the great beloved adventure series. And for a lot of people, this is actually their favorite of all the Indiana Jones. And that would include Steven Spielberg. He calls this one his favorite of the franchise. It was, of course, directed by Steven Spielberg, written by Jeffrey Boone, story by George Lucas. Stars Harrison Ford, of course, and the great Sean Connery as his father. Denham Elliott, Allison Doody, John Rhys-Davies. River Phoenix plays the young Indiana Jones in this film. It was nominated for 3 Oscars, including sound and score, and it won one for Best Sound Effects Editing. And as I mentioned, this is Spielberg's self-proclaimed favorite of the franchise. And he said he made this movie for 2 reasons. One was to fulfill the 3-movie obligation that he had with George Lucas, who, of course, was the producer. And 2, to atone for the criticism that he received in the previous installment of Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, which you and I looked at quite a ways back, and I always think it's a little bit more maligned. I actually like that episode. But nonetheless, there was a lot of criticism, and he sort of wanted to atone, and I think he did. Like I said, a lot of people find The Last Crusade their favorite of the bunch. Let's just some of these numbers, though. At the time, it cost $48 million, which was the most expensive movie of 1989. And for those who aren't familiar with movie economics, $48 million is a pittance. Most movies like this now routinely cost over $200 million. At the time of its release, it was the third highest grossing film of all time, behind E.T. and the original Star Wars. It grossed, and here's another shocking number, it grossed $29 million in its opening weekend, which was the biggest opening weekend in history. Again, nothing compared to today, where a big film is expected to gross over $100 million in a weekend. So times certainly have changed. One thing that's kind of funny about this is that because Spielberg was committed to this movie, he had to turn down directing Big and Rain Man, which would have been interesting, especially Big. I think he would have been an interesting director for Big, but wasn't meant to be. As with the other Indiana Jones movies, Harrison Ford did many of his own stunts, and according to the lead stuntman, Vic Armstrong, he had to pull Ford aside and say, hey, let me do some of the work, because Ford was doing so much of the action himself. In fact, Armstrong said that Harrison, if he wasn't such a great actor, probably would have been a great stuntman.
You know, Joe, the one thing that I've always liked about the Indiana Jones movies were the beginnings, right? It reached out and grabbed you right away. And I thought this one maybe even did it better than the other ones, of reaching out right away and grabbing you into this movie.
Well, and the opening of this one has a young Indiana Jones, and it was actually Harrison Ford who chose River Phoenix to play him as a teenager, because he'd worked with him before on a movie called The Mosquito Coast. So when they were looking for someone to play a young Indiana, it went to River Phoenix. Talking about casting, the great casting in this movie is Sean Connery, and he was always the first choice for this film. But if he hadn't been available or had turned him down, some of the other choices that might have gotten the nod was Gregory Peck, Christopher Plummer, were both considered for the role if Connery hadn't done it. As for you remember the famous Grail Knight at the end, he chose wisely. That guy, that was offered to Laurence Olivier, but he was too ill at the time to commit to the role, and sadly died shortly after the movie's release. So, not a whole lot of casting information there, but some big names, certainly.
Joe, you mentioned Sean Connery, and I thought the the connection between Harrison Ford and Sean Connery was really good. Was that role specifically designed for Sean Connery?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he was the first choice to do that. And, the irony, though, is that Sean Connery is only 12 years older than Connery in real life. So, than Harrison Ford in real life. So, they had to sort of age him up a little bit, and they kept Harrison Ford more clean-shaven, usually has some stubble as Indiana Jones. So they had to tweak a few things to sort of enlarge that age gap to make it at least plausible that he was his father. And, that's the crux of that movie is the father-son relationship. And talking about bonding as father and son, a lot of people will remember the Zeppelin sequence, the very famous sequence in the film. It was in a very hot studio, and Connery and Ford did the whole sequence without any pants. Because it was too hot, and they didn't want to sweat too much. So all the shots that were, waist high, they weren't wearing any pants. So you can imagine that next time you see it.
Only a film study professor would be able to bring that one to us this morning for sure. Filming the movie Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade without pants on. Sean
One
Connery.
other thing I'll add before we wrap up here is Harrison Ford famously has a cut on his chin, and a lot of people notice that, wonder where it comes from. Well, he actually was in a car accident when he was about 20 years old, and that's what it's from. But in the movie, that cut is explained, fictionally, of course, that the young Indiana Jones cuts himself with his own whip, which I always thought was a kind of a nice little nod to reality.
Well done. All right, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. You've piqued my interest. I think this weekend I'm going to go back and watch this one because I loved it originally when I saw it, and since then, and I haven't seen it in quite some time. It's comical, it's fun, it's a good movie. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Joe, well done, my friend. You can see Joe's work at WAKR.net, WAKR.net, and Joe will do it again next week.